It started as a light-hearted evening among friends. Laughter echoed in the room, drinks were poured and stories were shared. My wife, Amanda, was the life of the party as usual, drawing everyone into her vibrant energy. But it was during a seemingly harmless game of truth or dare that she crossed a line I never saw coming. She laughed, throwing her head back as she answered a question with an exaggerated smirk. "Oh, I could have any man I want. Maybe even someone here," she joked. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on Mark, my closest friend. The room erupted in laughter, but I felt an icy chill run down my spine. Amanda's words seemed to hang in the air longer than the laughter. The party went on, but for me the mood was irreparably changed. She noticed my quiet demeanor later that night and waved it off. "It was just a joke, don't be so sensitive," she said with a dismissive shrug. But it wasn't just a joke to me. It stirred something deep, a sense of betrayal wrapped in humor. That night, as Amanda slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling, revisiting every little moment of our relationship. The next morning, I brought up her comment, expecting an apology or even a clarification. Instead, she laughed it off again. "You really need to loosen up," she said, rolling her eyes. But her nonchalance only added fuel to the growing fire in my chest. I couldn't shake the unease, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt the need to create some emotional distance. Amanda didn't notice or didn't care. Days turned into weeks, and my frustration grew. The tipping point came when I overheard her on the phone with a friend. "It's not like he'd ever leave me, no matter what I say or do," she chuckled. That moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to be her emotional punching bag or the subject of her jokes anymore. If Amanda thought I was incapable of leaving, she was about to learn otherwise. The next day, I couldn't look at Amanda without feeling a deep sense of betrayal, even if it was over what she called a joke. Her laughter, her dismissiveness, it all felt like a cruel reminder of how little she valued my feelings. But I stayed calm, knowing that anger alone wouldn't solve anything. I decided it was time to take action, but not impulsively. I wanted to approach the situation with clarity, to determine whether this was truly a misunderstanding or a sign of something deeper. That evening I suggested we have a serious conversation. Amanda seemed uninterested but agreed to sit down. "You've been distant," she said, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and mild annoyance. "Is this still about that silly joke?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "But it's not just the joke, Amanda. It's what it represents. It's the way you dismiss how I feel about it." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "You're overthinking this. I didn't mean anything by it. Do you really think I'd do something like that?" "It's not about what you meant," I said. "It's about how it made me feel, and the fact that you don't seem to care." Amanda scoffed. "You're being dramatic. I don't see why this is such a big deal." Her refusal to acknowledge my concerns only deepened the rift between us. It was as though we were speaking two entirely different languages. I realized then that this wasn't just about the joke. It was about a pattern of behavior, a lack of respect that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Over the next few days I began to notice more. Little things Amanda said or did, things I'd ignored before, now felt glaringly obvious. The way she brushed off my opinions, how she always had to have the last word, and how she rarely took accountability for anything. It wasn't long before I decided to confide in Mark, my closest friend and someone I trusted implicitly. Mark had been at the party that night, and I wanted his perspective. "I don't think she meant it seriously," Mark said after I told him everything. "But I can see why it bothered you. You deserve to be with someone who values you." His words struck a chord. It wasn't just about whether Amanda was joking or not. It was about how I deserved to be treated in a marriage. From that point on, I started to think about my future differently. Could I continue in a relationship where my feelings were constantly dismissed? Where my concerns were treated as nuisances? Amanda noticed my growing detachment, but instead of addressing it, she doubled down on her dismissiveness. One night, during another argument about her joke, she laughed and said, "If you can't handle a joke, maybe I should find someone who can." Those words felt like the final nail in the coffin. I stared at her, feeling the last remnants of my patience slip away. The days that followed were some of the most confusing and painful ones of my life. Amanda's dismissive attitude had been the catalyst, but now everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. What had started as a minor issue, a joke at a party, had somehow evolved into something much bigger. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. If you can't handle a joke, maybe I should find someone who can. What did she mean by that? Was she testing my patience? Or was she telling me that she didn't care about how I felt anymore? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. This wasn't just about a harmless joke. It was about respect, communication, and trust. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt, but now the cracks in our relationship were too wide to ignore. For the first time in years, I started to ask myself some difficult questions. Was I truly happy in this marriage? Was I staying in it out of routine, or because I genuinely believed we could make things work? And most importantly, was I willing to continue compromising my own happiness for the sake of a relationship that seemed so one-sided? I decided to confront Amanda once again. This time, I knew I needed to be clear, and I had to stop avoiding the uncomfortable truths. Amanda, I began one evening as we sat in the living room, the tension thick in the air. We need to talk about what's been happening between us. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though she already knew where this conversation was heading. I've told you already, it was just a joke. I shook my head, feeling the frustration rise in my chest. It's not just about the joke anymore. It's about everything else. The way you've been treating me, the way you dismiss my feelings, and how you seem so indifferent to my concerns. She scoffed, leaning back in her chair. You're overreacting as usual. Why are you making such a big deal out of something so trivial? I tried to stay calm, but it was becoming harder to maintain my composure. It's not trivial, Amanda. It's about respect. If I can't talk to you about how I feel without being ridiculed, then what's the point? You don't even seem to care. Amanda remained silent for a moment, her gaze shifting away from mine. I could see her fidgeting with her fingers, her usual confident demeanor replaced with something more guarded. It wasn't the first time she'd deflected responsibility, but it was the first time I saw a glimpse of vulnerability. I do care, she finally said, but her voice was quieter now. I don't know how to make things better. Her words caught me off guard. Was this an attempt at honesty, or was it just another round of deflection? I wasn't sure, but I knew that things couldn't continue like this. You don't know how to make things better? I asked, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. Amanda, I've been trying to communicate with you for months. But every time I bring up something that bothers me, you shut it down. She looked down at her hands, then up at me, her expression softer. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I guess I've been so wrapped up in my own life that I stopped listening to you. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. The words felt like a faint attempt at reconciliation, but I wasn't sure if they were enough to undo the damage that had already been done. It was clear that Amanda had been absent in ways I hadn't fully recognized, but I also knew that I couldn't keep waiting for her to change. I can't keep living like this, I said, my voice steady but resolute. I can't keep putting in all the effort while you remain indifferent. Her face softened, and she looked at me with a mix of sadness and regret. What are you saying? Are you thinking of leaving? I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing. Was I ready to make that decision? Was I ready to end a marriage that had once been so full of promise? I don't know yet, I replied finally, but I need time to think. I need space to figure out what's best for me. The next few days were filled with silence and uncertainty. Amanda and I had barely spoken since that conversation. It felt as though we were two strangers in the same house, each of us existing in our own world, unable to connect. Every time I tried to approach her, I was met with a defensive attitude or a cold shoulder. She was distant, and it was becoming painfully obvious that we were both at a crossroads in our relationship. I spent hours reflecting on everything that had brought us to this point. How did we go from being so happy, so in love, to a place where I felt utterly alone? What happened to the woman I had married? The woman who was once my best friend, the one who used to share her dreams and fears with me. How had we ended up here, in this dark place where communication was non-existent? I had always prided myself on being a good listener, on being patient and understanding. I had always believed that relationships required compromise and communication, but no matter how much I tried, it felt like Amanda wasn't willing to meet me halfway anymore. The more I tried to reach out to her, the more I felt like I was being pushed away. That night, I found myself sitting in the living room, my mind racing as I sifted through the years of memories. Our first date, our wedding day, the births of our children. I thought about the moments when we were truly happy, the times when everything felt perfect. It felt so distant now, almost like a dream that I couldn't grasp anymore. Amanda walked into the room, and for the first time in days, she didn't look at me with indifference. Her eyes were soft, and there was a hint of vulnerability in her expression. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I've been thinking," she began, her words uncertain, "and I realize that I've been selfish. I haven't been the wife you deserve. I've been distant, and I've pushed you away." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hear more, to believe that she truly understood the damage she had caused. But another part of me was exhausted from trying to fix something that seemed broken beyond repair. I had been waiting for a moment like this, for her to finally acknowledge what had gone wrong. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to do with it. "I don't know if I can fix this," she continued, her voice shaky. "I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be." Her words stung. I wasn't angry at her. I had come to accept that she had her own struggles, her own challenges. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the hurt I had been carrying for so long. It wasn't just about the party joke anymore. It was about a pattern of neglect and disregard for my feelings. It was about the emotional distance that had slowly crept into our relationship, eroding the foundation of trust we once had. "I don't want to give up on us," I said quietly, finally breaking the silence. "But I don't know how much more I can take. I've tried to communicate with you, but it feels like I'm always talking to a wall. It's exhausting." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She wasn't just the woman who had made careless remarks at parties or brushed off my concerns. She was also someone who was capable of vulnerability and regret. It wasn't too late for us, but it wasn't going to be easy. We would both need to make a conscious effort to rebuild the trust we had lost. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I can't promise everything will be perfect right away. I need time, and I need to prove to you that I can be better." I took a deep breath, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Was I willing to give her that time? Was I willing to open myself up to the possibility of reconciliation, even though I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same? The answer wasn't clear. But one thing was certain. I wasn't ready to give up on everything just yet. Days turned into weeks, and things between Amanda and me remained in a fragile state. We both agreed that we would try to rebuild what had been broken, but the journey was far from easy. The words we spoke to each other were measured, carefully chosen, as if each one carried the weight of our entire relationship. There was a sense of hesitation in the air, a fear of making the wrong move, but we both knew that if we didn't try now, we might never have the chance again. We started with the basics. Communication. We had to learn how to talk to each other again, how to express our feelings and concerns without fear of judgment or rejection. I listened as Amanda explained her frustrations, things I had never fully understood until now. She talked about her personal struggles, her sense of loss, and how she had started to distance herself as a way of coping with the pressure she felt in our relationship and in her own life. "I thought I was doing what was best for me," Amanda confessed one evening as we sat down to dinner. "But I see now that I was pushing you away, and I didn't even realize how much I was hurting you." Her honesty caught me off guard. It was rare for Amanda to open up like this, especially about things that were so personal. And while I appreciated her vulnerability, It also brought to light just how much had been left unsaid over the years. We had both been living in a bubble of assumptions, thinking that we knew what the other needed but never actually asking. "I don't want to be the person who holds you back," I replied. "I've been frustrated, yes, but I never stopped caring about you. I want to be part of your life, but I need you to be present too." The conversation was difficult, but it was necessary. We both agreed that we would seek help from a counselor, someone who could guide us through the process of healing. It wasn't a quick fix, and it wasn't going to be easy, but we had made a decision to try, and that meant taking it one step at a time. At the same time, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Amanda's behavior. She was more attentive, more aware of the little things that made a difference. She would surprise me with small acts of kindness, like making my favorite dinner or taking an interest in the things I was passionate about. These gestures, though simple, reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who had always put others before herself. It wasn't just Amanda who was changing. I was too. I started to examine my own actions, the things I had done or hadn't done, that had contributed to the emotional distance between us. I realized that I had been so focused on my own frustrations that I had neglected to see the struggles she was facing. I had to learn to be patient, to listen without judgment, and to recognize the efforts she was making to rebuild what had been broken. But even with all the progress we had made, there were still moments of doubt. There were days when I wondered if we would ever fully recover, if the trust that had been lost could ever be restored. I questioned whether the foundation of our relationship was strong enough to withstand the cracks that had appeared over the years. One night, after a particularly challenging counseling session, Amanda and I sat on the couch together, both exhausted from the emotional weight of the conversation. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace between us. "I know we still have a long way to go," she said softly. "But I'm willing to fight for us." "Are you?" I didn't hesitate. "I am." It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, or that we wouldn't face more challenges along the way. But it was a commitment to try, to rebuild, and to move forward together no matter how difficult it might be. And as I sat there with Amanda's head resting on my shoulder, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us yet. Days passed, and while the heavy air of uncertainty lingered in our home, the cracks that had once seemed insurmountable were beginning to heal. Amanda and I found ourselves navigating through the labyrinth of our emotions, our communication more open than it had ever been. It wasn't easy, but every small step forward felt like a victory. Each conversation, each shared moment of vulnerability brought us a little closer to the trust we had lost. We continued attending counseling, a decision that both of us had come to respect. It gave us the tools we needed to understand each other better, and provided a safe space to express what had been buried for so long. During one of our sessions, we were asked to talk about the things we needed from each other moving forward. It was a question that had lingered in my mind for some time, but hearing it out loud forced me to confront my own desires and expectations. "I need you to trust me again," I said, my voice steady but laden with emotion. "I know it's not easy, and I know I've hurt you. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I want to be with you, and I want to make this work." Amanda sat quietly for a moment, her fingers nervously twiddling with the edge of her sleeve. She looked up at me, her eyes tired yet sincere. "I want that too," she admitted. "But it's hard, you know. I've hurt you too, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just hoping we can find a way to rebuild." Her words were raw, and they hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her that I had already forgiven her, that I didn't need an apology. But I knew it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about both of us putting in the effort to create something new from the ruins of the past. "We don't have to make up for everything," I replied, my voice softening. "We just have to move forward one day at a time. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect us to try. To be present for each other." Her eyes welled up, and I reached over, gently squeezing her hand. It wasn't an answer that solved everything, but it was a moment of clarity. We both knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but we were willing to try. In the weeks that followed, things gradually started to shift. We began spending more time together outside of the house, going for walks, taking trips to places that once held happy memories, and even just sitting in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. We found that we didn't need to speak constantly to feel connected. Sometimes, just sharing a quiet moment was enough to remind us why we were together in the first place. But while things were improving, there was still a lingering sense of doubt in the back of my mind. I wondered if the past would always haunt us, if the shadow of betrayal would forever loom over our relationship. I tried to push these thoughts aside, focusing instead on the positive strides we had made, but the fear of it all falling apart was hard to ignore. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Amanda looked across the table at me with a serious expression. Her eyes were searching mine, as if trying to gauge my feelings. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, her voice tentative. "About us, about the future. I don't want to keep dragging you through this. I don't want to be the source of your pain anymore." Her words hit me harder than I had anticipated. I knew that Amanda had been carrying guilt for months, and while I had reassured her countless times that I didn't blame her, I understood why she felt this way. The weight of what had happened wasn't something that could be easily shed. "I don't want you to feel like you're dragging me through anything," I said, my voice firm yet gentle. "What happened happened. We can't change it. But I do believe we can build something better. I don't want to walk away from this. Not when we've made it this far." Amanda's eyes softened, and she took a deep breath, as if finally exhaling a burden she had been holding for too long. "You're right," she whispered. "We can't change the past, but we can make the future something worth fighting for." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It was as if a new chapter had begun in our relationship, one where we both understood the weight of the past but were choosing to move forward, to create a new path together. The following weeks were a testament to our growth. We celebrated small victories. An evening of laughter, a peaceful Sunday morning, a quiet conversation without any underlying tension. These moments may have seemed insignificant to others, but to us they were monumental. They were proof that we had the strength to rebuild, that we were capable of creating something beautiful from the pieces of our broken relationship. As time passed, we learned to trust each other again. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were no longer haunted by the mistakes of the past. Instead, we were focused on the future and the life we could create together. As the months passed, our relationship settled into a new rhythm. The pain of the past was still there, but it was no longer an overwhelming force in our lives. We had taken control of our destiny, and we were no longer the victims of betrayal or the consequences of our mistakes. We were two people who had chosen to continue their journey together, despite the hurt and the doubt. We had built something solid, something that we could both rely on. Trust, though once broken, was slowly being rebuilt. We had learned to communicate better, to understand each other's needs, and to respect the space between us when needed. Our love was no longer a fragile thing, held together by hopes and promises. It was a strength, forged through adversity and a deep desire to make things work. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Amanda and I sat on the porch, enjoying the sunset. We didn't need to talk. The peace between us was enough. We had become comfortable with each other again, and the uncertainty that had once clouded our lives seemed to dissipate into the warmth of the evening. "Do you think we'll ever forget what happened?" Amanda asked, her voice soft and almost hesitant. I thought about her question for a moment. The scars from the betrayal would never completely disappear, but they didn't define us anymore. What defined us was the commitment we had made to one another, the resilience we had shown, and the love we had decided to nurture. "No," I said, "I don't think we'll ever forget. But I think we've learned how to move past it, how to build a future that's better than the past." Amanda nodded, her eyes searching mine. "I'm glad we're here," she said, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't know if we would be, but here we are." We spent the rest of the evening in comfortable silence, watching the colors of the sky change with the setting sun. There was a sense of finality in that moment, as if the journey we had taken had reached a peaceful conclusion. But while the story of our betrayal had ended, the story of our future had just begun. Thank you for following this journey. If you found the story meaningful, Please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting below. Your support is greatly appreciated. What do you think about how Amanda and her husband have turned things around? Share your thoughts with us, and stay tuned for more stories that explore the complexities of love, trust, and forgiveness.